There are these movies that I associate with Hollywood. I call them the quintessentially Hollywood movies. Not necessarily with the best content, but almost always with the most motion picture packed into a motion picture. The Sound of Music is one such movie. The one common thread associated with all these movies that I've seen many years back is that I can remember exactly what I felt the first time I watched it. The first time I watched The Sound of Music, I felt, hmm, this is the English movie which inspired that Hindi movie I have seen before watching this movie. I also felt there are too many songs in this film, but then the movie is titled The Sound of Music, not The Sound of Dialogue. And I remember Nazis in Austria. Was that truly necessary? Were Nazis important for the plot of the film? Perhaps not so. Today, 60 years after the release of The Sound of Music, in this video, I will look back at The Sound of Music. Over the years, The Sound of Music has become a point of good natured familial conflict between those in my family who love the movie and those who merely pretend not to. This is a movie which is so well laden with shortcut iconography that you associate it with a bob cut, a passing nun, a certain shade of upholstery. I don't remember exactly where I watched The Sound of Music for the first time, but of course I watched it on a DVD player, not in the theatre. I am, of course, not that old. But I remember when I first watched The Sound of Music, I did not exactly know what films were or how they worked, and to be really honest, I still don't. Essentially, for as long as I have been aware of Hollywood cinema, The Sound of Music has seemed to me its very essence. Although Hollywood cinema has changed over the years, it still retains the unique aspect of being the moviest movie ever made anywhere else in the world. The Sound of Music is almost like a Rosetta Stone for the form that everyone can read and reference and recognize. Now let's ask some serious film critic like questions. How much of the film's legend was founded in its first 120 seconds? At a conservative estimate, I would probably guess 90% of it, because it has that absurdly grandiose opening shot, which, to be really honest, must be a history making statement of intent. It shows a lofty, luxuriant view of the Bavarian Alps, which signals to the viewer that this movie was made with a whopping budget and is going to be a sprawling departure from the confines of the Broadway stage. This is not a stage performance, this is a motion picture meant to be enjoyed on the big screen. To this day, I can't remember if the camera is spinning more than Julie Andrews herself. The effect is so exhilarating that we feel spun along with it. Now, please be honest, viewers. If you have seen The Sound of Music, you must have, on encountering an open green space, felt at least fleetingly compelled to spread your arms and whirl freely. You must have felt the urge to belt out, "The hills are alive with the sound of music," at the top of your lungs. Many people probably cannot relate to this feeling, but it feels to me still to be a primal urge. It is a moment of many types of beauty fused into one: photographic beauty, geographic beauty, choreographic beauty, high kitsch and high camp. I would distrust anyone who professes themselves unmoved by it in any way, and in truth, nothing in The Sound of Music quite lives up to that vertiginous opening salvo, for all the tuneful, comforting, heart-plucking pleasures of the 3 hours that follow. Much of its interior drama is shot in the flat, beige house style of the era's prestige studio cinema. Beyond the perky, picturesque Salzburg location shooting of the Do Re Mi number, the film's flourishes of scenic spectacle are often a mere addendum to modest, straightforward, heavily extended storytelling, a sprig of parsley on a generous plate of meatloaf. I watched the movie so many times that it needed a long break of about 10 years for me to regain the fascination for the film. Once the infallible head clearing tonic of that first number had worn off, I was struck by the frequent smallness and occasional stiffness of the film that once seemed to me to be the biggest motion picture ever to have seen the light of day. The stilted love triangle between Julie Andrews' impossibly winsome Maria, Christopher Plummer's improbably handsome Captain Von Trapp, and Eleanor Parker's unluckily jilted Baroness is the stuff of any dusty mid century soap. The collective angst of the motherless Von Trapp children is vaguely written and blandly performed. Did the film urgently need the stakes raising intrusion of the Nazis in its second half? Perhaps not. In fact, the Nazis could have been drafted in from another movie altogether, but it was necessary to do so, to give the movie a proper climax. And yet, The Sound of Music happens to be more than the sum of its parts. It's not just the X Factor assets of Julie Andrews' peachy luminescence, the miraculous alchemy between Julie Andrews and her grinning on screen brood, or the irresistibly sticky quality of even the worst songs in The Sound of Music. The real asset of The Sound of Music is the unquantifiable personal associations that each viewer brings to watching this film. That the already riotously chintzy Lonely Goatherd number is forever bonded in my mind with Gwen Stefani's 2006 hip hop makeover of the song only intensifies the glee it brings me. That I can't see Parker's character without mentally reciting the viral McSweeney's letter formally announcing the cancellation of her nuptials is also the film's benefit. As a film, The Sound of Music has always been flawed. As a culture object, it gets ever more diamantine. As I started digging deeper into the history of The Sound of Music, the motion picture, I was astonished to learn that it was not universally regarded as a masterpiece when it released. Pauline Kael was fired from McCall's magazine for calling it a sugar coated lie and the sound of mucus. The Sound of Music, the sound of mucus. I would be very proud to have written such a piece as a film critic. Pauline Kael, remember, was fired for writing this, but many shared in her revulsion. Later, Slavoj Zizek would term it a pro-fascist film. The Sound of Music, a pro-fascist film. And he was cheered on from detractors who have long felt pummeled by the musical's deathless popularity. When a film becomes so popular, any opinion to the contrary is frowned upon and people are actively jeered for having such opinions. It is a motion picture. It's not supposed to please everyone. Why can't we make room for opinions to the contrary? And I'm not talking only about motion pictures here. The Sound of Music was perhaps the first film to alert me to the notion of critical subjectivity, to generally agreed strata of good taste and bad taste, and to the illicit thrills of enjoying bad taste. But let's be honest, The Sound of Music has never become a guilty pleasure for me. It does not give me pleasure. There is too much earnest rapture in The Sound of Music for that, too much honest pleasure, too much dizzily twirling joy, too unreal if you are going to ask me what I feel about the movie. It's difficult to suspend disbelief when everything is working out so easily for everyone. Film anniversaries often prompt reflections on the shortness of time, but in this case I marvel that The Sound of Music is only 60. It is hard to believe that cinema lived and thrived as long as it did without the film's most enduring images, inspiring fantasy, and mockery in equal measure, as elemental and immovable as the Bavarian Alps themselves.